Okay. Yeah, I was 4 when he moved to Lisbon. The reason he moved was the condition of the roads on Oak Hill. At the age of 4, he had to think about my getting into school, and it just didn't work. And the other thing was to get his farm products into the city. He couldn't do it with the roads the way they were. And with the war just ending, there wasn't the people and the equipment to fix them.
They always told us they moved down off from the hill for the sake of the children. I think that's probably true, but I think even more it was for the sake of the business, and that he had to move in order to grow the business, and that's what he wanted to do, you know.
But it changed him a lot along the way. I mean, like you said, incredible growth from a small-time farmer of various miscellaneous things.
Yeah, he took over when he was 16, and that farm was not a going concern at the time. They'd lost their cash crop that they'd had before the war, and had just been limping along. And he was the one that started the chicken business and made it work. And by the 40s, just before he moved down off the hill, he was being written up in the papers as one of the upcoming farmers in the area, you know, and so forth. And the same way, once he moved down off, he continued to grow the business. And by the mid-60s, he was one of the leading independent egg producers in the state. And then he changed over to become an assessor and became one of the leading assessors in the state, you know. So
he was very, very smart to get into the chickens when he did and to get out when he did. Both moves were just right.
We have quite a lot of pride in looking back at what he did.
But we weren't very aware of it at the time. We just didn't really think about it.
One of my really, really nice memories of Dad is getting the chickens in off the range at night. It would come fall, and it would start to get cold weather, and it was time to take the chickens that had gone out on range as quite young chickens and had probably just begun to lay a few eggs, which we were collecting, in the grass on the range. And then we would go out after dark, and they'd be all sound asleep in the shelters. And chickens are really easy to move after dark because they don't start fluttering off once they've gone to sleep. They just murmur a little bit, and you can pick them up by the legs and put them in the crates. So we'd be a crew. His children were his crew, and we'd go get those chickens and pass them out of the shelters and put them in the crates and carry them over to the hen house and put them up in the hen house. It was always a fun evening, a family evening. And while we were there, Dad would turn on the radio, and we'd either listen to the Red Sox, and Dad would tell me all about how the manager should manage the game, or we'd be listening, if it was evening, to, Jack Benny or Miss Brooks, one of the comedies that came over the radio in those days. And I have the most wonderful memories. I mean, how cozy can you be than to get to work with your dad and have such entertainment? And he was so cheerful about life. And that's one thing I wanted to make sure I got in, is that his general attitude was very cheerful, very pleasant, very playful, and willing to work, never seemed to mind the work he had to do, was glad to have our company. And the hours I spent working beside him were always good ones.
On the tractor that Dad had, in the wintertime, he put a 55-gallon barrel on the back of the tractor. I guess it was for ballast. And when it snowed out, he would use that tractor to plow the farm. And oftentimes, at least and I think the other kids, would ride in that barrel while he was out plowing. But I'm wondering just how much ballast an 8-year-old is.
One of my earliest memories, especially of Dad, is standing when he's milking the cow. And while he's milking, he is quoting Lady of the Lake or Hiawatha or some of those other things that he did. I'm sure it helped both him and the cow with the rhythm, but quoting poetry while he milked.
Dad used to get awards for egg production on the farm, and we used to ask him what he thought was doing it, why he got these awards, what the egg production was for, and he claimed it was because he sang opera to the hens.
Oh, yes, he was a tenor. All those operas that he loved, he sang the tenor parts when he was walking through the hen houses.
he was not a man to swear. It's similar to the stories about his father, who didn't, his strongest word was, oh dear. Dad's strongest word was somewhere in that range, too. It was one of those things in their family. It was part of their ethics, I guess. So he had a great love for jokes that allowed him to sort of get a little swear in sideways. And I'll give you an example. Dad used to say, you know, there are people who start vast projects with half-assed ideas. And that always tickled me because I knew that it's something he would never say unless he had a joke that allowed him to say it, you know.
That was just the way it was. His father before him the same way. But there was an incident on the farm where there was an accident with a pulley system that took off the ends of two of his fingers. And we thought, there, we've got him now. And we said, Dad, you must have said something when that happened. And he said, I would have had to be swearing at myself, and I don't take that from nobody.
I was thinking about Daddy's sense of humor. I'm sure everybody has mentioned Daddy's sense of humor. And on the trip out west is one of the times I remember most because there were just a lot of signs that you frequently saw. There was the picnic area, which for Daddy became the picnic aria, and he launched right into one, you know. He took us all on a trip to west because he thought that would be good for us. Thinking about the trip west, if you want examples not just of humor, but of his patience and tolerance and general ability to take life the way it came, and just imagine picking up 6 of your kids and heading west from 8 years old.
All day long in a station wagon. There's 8 of us in that station wagon.
Right, and kids have to stop and go to the bathroom. I don't know hardly any men that can deal with stopping enough to let their kids go to the bathroom on a trip. I know mine couldn't.
Particularly remember trips to Katahdin, of course. We did a lot of hiking on Katahdin, but a lot of upcountry, Greenville area, and the dam up there that we used to go see. He knew this state very, very well, and we were always traveling somewhere and singing in the car and listening to the Red Sox.
The other place that we had him outdoors was we went mountain climbing together. I remember being carried up on his back, Sugarloaf Mountain, or at least part of it, and it couldn't have been that easy, even if I was tiny, you know. And so he was always in great shape, and he was always up for hiking, climbing, whatever. And actually, one thing I think about with my mother is if he went on a trail and they were taking a break, or if we went down to Orr's Island and the kids were kind of like released to go play, where my father and mother would be Mom sitting somewhere with my father's head on her lap. From the beginning, they planned to have a lot of children. And they got them, and they were very pleased. And my memory of that is that he would just beam on us. He would just smile and look happy and proud. And that was of his wife and his children. And I think that she suited him. You know, I think that he was very pleased with his choice. And I'll tell you another thing that's kind of a funny story. Toward the end of their lives, when Mama was still able to sit with him on the sun porch, she'd go sit right next to his chair so he could hear her, and he was always really happy for her company. I would say that in general, you know. And he would just start this questioning. He would say, "Why did I marry you, Hilda?" Anyway, and depending upon their mood, then they would play that in 100 different ways. Sometimes she would say she had no idea, and sometimes she would say it was all her mother's idea, and sometimes he would say that he really couldn't find anybody else. But it was sort of like one of these endless questions with just so much affection in it whenever he asked it, you know.
In later years, when I was visiting, well, after we moved to Gray, and he took me down to the brook down through the woods here. We were coming back up and standing around talking, and he was talking about how lucky his life had been and how it said something about
how smart Hilda was. And I said, you were very brave to marry her because she was that smart. And he says, oh, I didn't know it.
Both of them very strong for education. Neither of them had gotten quite as far in education as they wanted to themselves, and they really wanted us to do better. And so there was a fairly high expectation that we would not necessarily excel in school, but put our full effort into it. And,
oh, yes, and we helped one another, and they helped us. And
Dad was disappointed when I didn't want to go into the farm, but he didn't push me at all.
We were expected to do very well in school. He did not go to college, to finish high school, you know. And he always thought that he missed something because he didn't. He got his GED, did very, very well for himself, but he still had that feeling that he wished he'd gone to school. And so he made sure that we all did.
He was raised a classicist. In those little one-room schoolhouse up in the hills in Maine, they studied the classics. They studied the history of Greece and a little Latin, and they memorized poems, and they just knew their classics really well. So he was a very educated man, even though he didn't graduate from high school.
He was interested in lots of things. He would bring things that he'd read in the newspaper and bring things he was reading in the books, and Mother the same, and he would find out what we all were doing, too. The dinner table was not all fun.
He was quiet, even with the family. He never dominated conversations. You know, occasionally he would tell a story or a funny story or something, and people would always listen and let him speak because he didn't speak a lot. I mean, that was one of the reasons when he decided to say something, everyone else kind of shut up and listened for a change, you know. But he didn't do a lot of it. So mostly he was kind of happy to sort of sit back and almost bask in the presence of a family that got along, you know, miraculously well. I mean, while people were there, I don't remember hardly anything in the way of fighting or disagreement. People set aside things when they showed up at that house. That house was a place of safety and goodwill and love, and it was very nice there. And his presence underwrote all of that. I mean, he was always he had such a gentle nature of his own. I mean, he was always pretty accepting and quiet and good-humored and so forth.
All the grandchildren have that feeling of it was great to come to Grandma and Grandpa's house. They were always welcome, and it was relaxed and easy to be here.
There's a good story of when Brenda and Jim and the two kids were living across town here. Anytime the kids were sick, they had to go to Grammy's because they couldn't go to school and Brenda was working and so forth. So there was one morning when Adam got up and says, I'm sick, I got to go to Grammy's. And Eddie says, I'm sick, I got to go to Grammy's. And Brenda says, I'm sick too, I got to go to Grammy's. And the three of them picked up still in their pajamas and came over.
But I remember just time hanging out at the house and him wandering around singing bits of song or reciting poetry or reading to us out of the newspaper or, you know, all of us kibutzing on the crossword puzzle. And it seemed like wherever he was happy to be there. And he liked people and he liked hanging out with people and just doing his thing. He was always still so active, and he grew dahlias and gladiolas, and that was kind of fun because I did too. And when he got older and was no longer growing as many and then stopped growing them all together, I would bring in blossoms from my plants, some of which I'd gotten from him. I think he gave me some of his dahlia bulbs, and so I would bring him flowers knowing that he wasn't growing them anymore. But you're right, he was always busy. Huge garden, woodchucks to shoot, firewood to haul, you know, just stuff going on. He was working on the spring, trying to dam that up and thinking about putting fish in it. I mean, just lots of projects and stuff going on.
But coming back later on, because it was quite different for me. I mean, I came back and went twice. So I went off and had my career, went to Alaska, all that, and came back again. And at that point, what I really wanted to do was help keep some quality of life for the folks. I planned trips and made sure that they got to Smalls Falls and did a lot of things for them that they did for us when we were growing up to make sure there was a little joy and not just humdrum, in their lives. I've always felt that was one of the best things I had to offer in the later years.
He got to where his legs weren't so great. He could walk all right, but standing, he lost strength real fast. So I was at the house helping. You knew that. When he was in the bathroom, I would go in when he was done and help him pull his pants back up. Well, it takes a couple minutes. And I was worried about his leg strength and moving too fast, and apparently I wasn't gentle enough. And he would say something, but he would never say, "Hey, watch it," or "Be careful." Well, he said something sort of in a backwards way a couple of times. But then one day he just started singing. And it took me a couple lines. I figured out he was singing "Over There. The Yanks are coming." Because the Yanks are coming. I was about to yank at him.
Well, he still was so cheerful. And he still had this great sense of humor. Beth could tell you more than I could because she was helping to take care of him, but she would tell me grandpa stories that just made me laugh. Oh, here's one. They told me that after he started using the walker, he was going to pick out a new book at the bookcase, and he fell over. I mean, he fell on the floor, bumped his head. And Wayne went running over to help him get up. And here's this 90-something-year-old guy laying on the ground, hit his head, and Wayne's concerned. And Grandpa's like, no, let me read the bottom titles first. It's like, leave me on the floor so I can see what the books are on the bottom shelf. So that who he was stayed strong all the way through to the very end. When we took him to the hospital, he was in the emergency room for a while, and then when they transferred him up to the floor, we went down to the lounge while they got him settled. And when we walked in, when they said he was settled, he looked up and he said, "Are you folks following me?" And he'd just been on an ambulance ride and transferred to the hospital. He was very sick with a gallbladder infection, and he was still right there, that sense of humor, that, sparkle.
Well, he was just so easygoing. It was not difficult to take care. He didn't complain. He didn't feel like life was just giving him a real bad thing or anything like that. He just accepted that this was his way of growing older, and he didn't like it all, but he certainly would give us good cooperation and put up with whatever we had to do.
Yeah, he didn't even show frustration. It isn't that he was just trying to put on a good face for us or anything. He expected to take life the way it came.
And he'd sometimes apologize for the amount of work we were having to do for him, and we'd stop and tell him that you're as about as easy as anybody can be to do this kind of thing for, because he was. It's the same sort of thing that made it easy to travel with him. He was very accepting of what came around and just did what had to be done next.
I'm really proud to be his daughter, and I am really proud that my children are of his bloodline, if you know what I mean. I think it's somewhat rural, but like with all the best values of rural people. I think he personally was so witty, so intelligent, so gentle, so well-meaning, and so full of integrity. It seems to me that that's a lot to hand on to the next generation and the next.
Yeah, I'd say he was a role model influence for me in a lot of ways. I mean, I'd like to say that I lived up to it or something like that, but I can't really.
I wonder what he would think about just my kind of frenetic life down here in Boston and in the world of corporate finance, which is so radically different from his day-to-day experience in life. At the same time, though, as I'm going about my business, his kind of values are the ones that have stayed with me in the back of my head. It was a well-worn path, I think about him, of course, sitting and doing his crossword every day, just taking time with a good book or with his opera or to watch the game. And those are absolutely, for me, the good things in life. And the same ideas about food and about growing and appreciating the natural world. Anytime I get any spare time, it's what I come back to. So I feel blessed that we had that experience. I'm really grateful to Grandpa for that. And that's absolutely something where if I have kids someday, I hope that one way or another, I'll be able to pass that on to them, those same values, those same experiences.
He had to change an awful lot, but he didn't change. The details did, but not him. A good person has an integrity to him that doesn't blur, I think, and he's one of those.